Hey, I'm Dr. Deb. Welcome again. This time we're in situation 5, and we're going to look at Larry. What's it like to be Larry? And you might be saying, why do I care what it's like to be Larry? I got my own problems, which is true. You do have your own problems. But interestingly enough, the best way to resolve your own problems, besides self-care, yes, that's number 1, absolutely. But when you're doing the self-care and you're in self and you feel very good and empowered about who you are, the next step is to understand what's it like to be the person that drives you the craziest. Why is that? Well, one answer is know your enemy. That's from a book on war, and I don't believe in looking at things that way. I don't believe in war. I don't believe in thinking of the other person as your enemy. Unless they insist on being your enemy, then I guess they are. Then they've defined the terms whether you like it or not. Like in the case if they initiated a divorce or something like that. But if that is not the case and they have not defined themselves as your enemy, why should you? So then let's go back to the original question. What is the reason for looking at what's it like to be Larry? Let's say Larry is your partner, and whether it's really what's it like to be Larry or Mary, it could be the husband who's feeling this way about the wife. The point is that we do have to understand where the other person's coming from, because it will help us know how to go forward. If you want your needs to be met, right? As I said, step number 1 is self-care. Because you're the best person to meet your own needs, very frankly. But there are some needs, like the need for companionship, right? Just talking to the person you supposedly love, that's companionship, can only be done by another person. True, I walk around the house talking to myself because there isn't another person here, which may be why I like talking to you guys. But the reality still is that you have to be able to get something out of the other person. And the best way to do that is being in self so that you're not being nagging and demanding. But then understand what's it like to be Larry. So let's take a peek into a therapy session, because this will answer the basic question you might have as to why have I finally got them in and they end up dropping out. So Larry walks into the therapy room, very glum, and he's talking about this recent experience he had of blowing up at one of his employees for having made a mistake with a client. And he sent a copy to the client of the letter that he had sent to his employees so that the client would know that he was threatening to fire the employee. He was thinking that by showing the client that he was on top of it and correcting a problem, it would help. Instead, it backfired. The client completely left him without any other word, and he was stuck after years of a client's relationship with his corporation. So he's trying to understand what happened, and he realizes in the previous session that he made a mistake by blowing up at his employee, because that also made the client feel bad. And it didn't really solve the problem that was created in the first place. And nothing was said about solving that problem. So now another week has gone by, and Larry comes in again down. And it seems that more of the same things have happened with other workers in his company. The way therapy has often worked is this. As therapist, I might say to Larry, well, did you use your tools? Did you get calm? Did you breathe? Questions of that sort. And to many of those questions, he would have a feeling, I blew it again. I blew it again. This feeling, I can never do anything right. That feeling is the killer of therapy. If a person goes to therapy and they feel, I blew it again, I can never do anything right, I'm always wrong. In fact, I am wrong. That's no good. That's depression. That's hopelessness. That's helplessness. That's giving up on yourself. And that's even giving up on the therapy process, because these words, these questions that lead the person down that road come from the therapist. So then you can start blaming the therapist too, or the person like Larry would start blaming the therapist too. So the problem with those feelings inside is what? We've been talking about the need for self. There's no self there. Where's self? Self is supposed to be bolstering the person up, giving them a wide panoramic view of life and their situation in it, so that they see, okay, I made a lot of mistakes. It's okay. I can fix every one of them. Rather than a narrow view which seems to say, I can never fix things. I can never make things right. The wide panoramic view is called perspective. When you're in self, you have perspective. You have a big picture look at how your life places in the context of everything that you've been experiencing in the past, and everything going around, and everything you know. Now, here's what I'm saying to Larry when he's answered those 3 questions. Did you do the breathing? Did you use your tools? Etc. Here's what I might be saying to Larry. Hey, Larry, your hopeless part has come out. He might say, yeah, I feel hopeless. And I would say, that's interesting. Can you have your hopeless part step aside just a little bit so you can talk to it, like that. And ask your hopeless part if it's willing to hear something else. So the therapist has to help self come out. Self has been hidden behind the hopeless and helpless, depressed parts, the parts that do not see anything except the failure that Larry is. And this is not going to help him. Ridiculing him, putting him down, wagging a finger at him by the therapist or his wife or anybody else is not going to help. It's not going to turn things around. So what needs to happen is for Larry himself to see this step is only a step in part of a big journey. So that's why the therapist might say, can you ask that part to just step outside of you a little bit so that you can talk to it? And then the therapist can ask the part, or ask Larry to ask the part, would you be willing to just let Larry be for a little while in trying to get a bit of self-energy out there so that he can handle things? And Larry himself might be willing, but when a person's depressed, they have very little energy, very little motivation, so this is a kind of hard job. And it may be that the therapist needs to ask this part directly rather than asking Larry. Okay, but as the conversation opens up, one of the things the therapist is going to ask Larry himself, how do you feel about that part? And Larry may say, I don't like the part because he always pulls me down. And therefore, one of the things that has to happen here, and I know this sounds like a big detour, but there needs to be a little bit of a mending of the relationship between the part that pulls him down and Larry himself. And one thing that a therapist would do in that case is say, I understand, but he may very well have good reasons for feeling like pulling you down is exactly the right thing instead of not being very helpful. And I think it would be great if you and your part and I could deal with that, but a little later. So ask your part if he minds if we get back to him with the relationship itself a little later. And in the meantime, if he would just let me help you see things better from a place of self. If that part agrees and Larry is already feeling a little bit better because the part is now not dictating his mood, the therapist can start reminding him that the very first thing to pat himself on the back for is that he did come to therapy. That shows he wants to make things better. The second thing is to remind him how long it took him when he was in school or his graduate years, post-college, of learning his profession. How long did it take him to get it right? Is it an overnight thing? Can he expect that he had a few sessions of therapy and bingo, everything's done? No, of course not. So he's on the right track. And it's the therapist's job to give Larry that motivation to keep going and to see his mistake as only one step backward. And if there are 2 or 3 steps backward, that's normal. Because let me tell you something, it's key for Larry to be encouraged. He's just human. It's far better for Larry to take a position of I'm learning than the one he originally had of saying I can't change. This is who I am. That's no good. That is going to really bite him in the rear later. I hope this point makes sense. And next, we're going to go into Cheryl in the next video. You take care.